listeners. I'm Alex Welding again, and this is another short episode in the extra series of the Double Dorje podcast. If you're one of the few who have been following, you'll already know this, but the podcast has been put very much onto the back burner for a period of at least a few months, because I am putting quite a lot of work, to be honest, into editing some transcripts of interviews done with nuns at Tsokbema, with a view to getting their stories published in some form at some time. That remains to be seen. Anyway, it's work. Now, I recently came across a series of posts on Substack critiquing the state of Tibetan-style Buddhism in the West these days. The posts underline the way that the frankly dreadful scandals that have been surrounding many of the larger Vajrayana institutions, particularly in the West, and we're talking here first and foremost, but definitely not only, about the organizations surrounding, for instance, the late Trungpa Mukpo and the late Sogyal Laka. The point being that these scandals have systemic roots. They're not just hiccups in a system that's otherwise generally working perfectly or nearly. And I think it's neither controversial nor particularly novel or interesting to point to the central role played in these scandals, or in the atmosphere that allows these scandals, by Guru Yoga, devotion to the Lama. This Guru Yoga does only too easily tend to encourage what frankly is an excessive deference to gurus. This malady, this sickness almost, is compounded by the place of tulkus in the architecture of the grand Buddhist institutions, and the patterns that these institutions have to preserve themselves put these tulkus effectively beyond criticism. That's actually slightly different matter. The importance of this to us ordinary practitioners is that guru devotion, and in particular the meditation practices we know as Guru Yoga or Lama Naljo, those practices do play an indispensable and central part in our regular practice. So how are we going to really think about this relationship? Now, my suggestion here, little suggestion, is that we can lay out the approaches to Guru Yoga along some sort of spectrum, or along a stick with a dodgy end and an honourable end. At the dodgy end, these practitioners tend to see their own personal guru as somebody infallible and all good. Anything that the guru does, however apparently harmful, is in a mysterious way helpful to our spiritual growth. It crushes the ego. Everything painful or exploitative that is done by that guru is done, they think, out of compassion and wisdom. And so it goes on. Inevitably, some of those gurus start to be drawn in when students look on them like this. They start to themselves become convinced that they really are more or less perfect, and that whenever they're angry or even sadistic or want to exploit people in other ways, this is wisdom working through them. And of course then they are tempted to exploit this power that the students have given them. If you're reading or listening to this, you can already obviously use the internet, so you can search for the scandals surrounding the people I mentioned above. At the other end, the honourable end, at the honourable end, the thinking is a little bit more refined. Now, I should mention that these days I mainly practice in the Nyingma tradition, and so I'm going to base my next comments on the position of Guru Rinpoche, otherwise known as Padmasambhava. In fact, this figure has a number of names, but Padmasambhava is perhaps the one most widely known in the West. In the Nyingma way of doing things, Guru Rinpoche is the quintessential guru. We look on our own guru, our own lama, as an expression of Guru Rinpoche's wisdom and blessing. He or she is, you might say, a channel, although I don't want to try to bring in the New Age ideas about channeling. That's something else again. Heavens forfend. But this is something that goes way beyond the individual personality, this business of guru. It does not mean that we have to imagine that our own guru is without faults. After all, anybody who's been in love properly already knows that after the phase in which your lover appears truly and totally perfect, you come to see that he or she is not. That doesn't mean the end of love. In the same way, the main point is that your guru, who does indeed have to be a decent person, has to be educated, trained, accomplished in practice. There are lots of texts that describe the qualities that a guru must have. This person may indeed still have some faults, and they are faults, but nevertheless has the zap, the transmission, the compassion, the wisdom. Even Guru Rinpoche, who in one aspect was a person, a human being, coming from what we now call Pakistan, and someone who was active in India and Tibet 1300 years ago, is not seen as being just that historical person. He too is a manifestation or an expression of what we can almost think of as the cosmic guru. Not that that's an accepted term, but along those lines. In the broadest sense, the guru here is seen as an automatic, or maybe we might say spontaneous, response of the enlightened mind reacting to the suffering of sentient beings. The guru can appear everywhere, anywhere, can take any form. The guru can manifest as Guru Rinpoche, and in that sense, Guru Rinpoche can appear as our own teacher. We should not push this kind of parallel too far, but the guru is in some ways like the Holy Ghost is to the Christians. There are practices in which the guru as Guru Rinpoche appears, for example, as a flaming, wrathful, blood-drinking deity with gnashing teeth and bloodshot eyes. Or the guru can appear as Vajrayogini, that fierce yet attractive, naked 16-year-old girl with 3 eyes and fangs. That's how it is. To underline this, I'd like to tell you a little story from the Kagyu tradition. When Kagyu students do their refuge practices, I have to explain this first of all, they visualize their guru in the form of Dorje Chang. Dorje Chang is a beautiful, peaceful, dark blue Buddha, very dark blue, sitting cross-legged, wearing the silks and robes of an Indian prince, holding a dorje and bell across his chest. Dorje Chang is also said to be the origin, celestial origin we might say, of the teachings that were given to the first human beings in the Kagyu lineage, most particularly given to Tilopa. In this visualization, there is a large Dorje Chang in the center of this visualization, and that Dorje Chang represents the student's own Lama. Around and above this Dorje Chang, the figures of the lineage are shown. There's 40 or 50 of them. I can't actually quite remember what the count is, but they are painted at a smaller size and they go all the way back in a precisely defined line back up to Tilopa. Above Tilopa's head, there is another Dorje Chang, who is the one that is the origin of Tilopa's teachings. This is the one we might call the heavenly Dorje Chang, if you like. Try to keep that picture in mind. Now, some years ago, this would have been in the 1980s, there was an exceptional Kagyu teacher known as Khenpo Tsultrim Gyatso, and he was working with a number of Western students. I myself was lucky enough to meet Khenpo Tsultrim a few times, had 1 or 2 teachings from him, but I wasn't close student, and I must be clear that the story I'm going to tell is second-hand. Anyway, it seems that one of these students had taken these ideas about the central figure being his own personal teacher only too literally, and instead of imagining the form of Dorje Chang, was actually imagining the form of Khenpo Tsultrim in his human body, just as you would actually see him across the dinner table. When Khenpo Tsultrim discovered this, he was, it seems, more than a little bit cross, insisting that no, disciples must not take refuge in he himself as that particular human being, inasmuch as he was able to carry and transmit the teachings coming down from Dorje Chang. He was their guru or lama and represented or embodied even Dorje Chang in their lives, but he was still a human being with faults. And that is why the guru, even the personal concrete guru, is visualized in the form of Dorje Chang. So that's it. Devotion to the lineage, the teachings and blessings that we receive from that lineage through the empowerments, the teachings and so on given to us by a teacher, by our teacher, that devotion is crucial. Gratitude and respect, of course, and yes, devotion are certainly due to our personal teachers. But if we turn off our brains, sooner or later we will turn off our hearts and our practice will be at risk of collapse. So, we do not have to distort it as many Westerners do, and indeed I have to say many Tibetans, into immature idol worship. There are texts well known in the tradition describing guru devotion in really quite strict and exacting terms. And if we do not realize that there is at least an element of a hyperbole in this, and that like in a lot of Buddhist teaching, there is allegory as well, then we are in for a bumpy ride. It is, of course, also true that if we look properly and thoroughly at the teachings, we will also find mentions of the fact that, you have to still at least keep your head screwed on. Common sense. So in sad extreme cases, this mistake does include a failure to recognize harm when harm actually is done. We do not have to return to the mentality of infants. So, having said that, thank you for listening. From the Double Dorje, I give a final bow to some of my amazing teachers, and bye.